Voluntary exit interviews were held on Tuesday afternoon, and we'll give you our takeaways as Erik Spoelstra and a handful of Heat players talked about this past season and what the future might hold. Plus, now that Miami season is done and the emotions have quieted some, we'll give our thoughts on the end of a great season. All that and more on today's edition of Locked On Heat.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, Heat Nation. It's a Wednesday edition of Locked On Heat, your daily podcast covering all things Miami Heat. However, you may be listening or watching on YouTube, Odyssey, or on your favorite podcast app. Thanks so much for making us your first listen every day. I'm David Ramil, and with me, as always, is my co-host Wes Goldberg back in Miami. Today was the last day, officially, of the Miami Heat season. They held exit interviews with the media, and just to set the scene a little bit, those are completely voluntary. Not every player has to show up for that. They're held in the same media room that exit interviews or post-game pressers and pre-game pressers are always held, at least from the Miami Heat side of things. You have your table set up on the podium. You got a microphone there, reporters in attendance, a Zoom call for those of us who couldn't be in attendance. And other than that, players just kind of roll in and out. Today, it was Erik Spoelstra and 5 other Heat players on the Heat roster who chose to speak to media. Again, totally voluntary. No Jimmy Butler, no Kyle Lowry, no Bam Adebayo, as you assumed it would be. And a lot of waiting in between. That's usually how it plays out. This is the first time it's been done in a while. I think they kind of skipped it last year, and they certainly didn't do it in the year after the Orlando bubble because there was so much chaos following that finals run. So it was a little different.
And no Pat Riley. Pat Riley's not going to talk until next week. So we'll cover that and have a show about that next week. But that's really that's who you want to hear from. We heard from Spo after Game 7. Yeah. We heard from Jimmy, Kyle, and Bam after Game 7.
When he rolls his sleeves and tightens his shirt, he goes, "Hello, everybody," and puts his hands down on his desk. Now you know. Now the shit is really starting to roll. That you get a really complete sense that he's ready to start talking about everything. Like that's usually how a Pat Riley presser goes. So it should be interesting. Well, we want to talk a little bit about Erik Spoelstra in particular because he had some comments that I think a lot of Heat fans are reading some into it, and we'll kind of break it down a little bit more. But basically looking at the construction of this past roster, how far they were able to go this past season, and what happens next. And I think we've got some video and audio clip for those of you listening in on the show.
Irene, you know me so well.
Too well.
You phrased that impeccably well.
And?
You did not leave me any gaps. It is a Pat thing, but look at the history of how we've done things since Pat and Mickey have created this culture. Anytime we're close, and have banged on the door, and even if it ended on a disappointing loss, our history has shown that we usually bring, the majority of the group back, the core back, and we take another shot at it. Of course, you're talking 48 hours, and after we had an opportunity, on a make or a miss, to potentially get to the next round. Yeah, you want to have, a chance to do it again with the same group. I love this group. I love the locker room, and I'm just really grateful that we had an opportunity, to collaborate and work together and experience everything, this season. It's a beautiful profession we live in. And it's been crazy, all around, the world and dealing with everything we've been dealing with. But for us to be able to do what we do and do this together with a bunch of like-minded people in terms of how we view competition, man, it doesn't get much better than that.
So there you have it, Erik Spoelstra asked by the Sun Sentinel's Ira Winderman. Very carefully worded question about whether or not he'd want to see this roster return back as is. So a lot to read into it. What were your takeaways from that response from Spo?
Well, number one, what else is he supposed to say? No, this roster sucked. We really overachieved, and we really got to overhaul this whole thing. So that was my initial reaction, but I did find it interesting, and I actually did believe him when he said when he conveyed his earnestness about how much he really did enjoy coaching this team, and that's not a new thing. You know, you and I have been around this team all year long. That's something that we have been picked up that we've picked up on and has talked about all season, right?
Yep.
So I do think that the coach, in this case, Erik Spoelstra, tends to like the team that he just coached. Now, obviously, that's not always true. Doc Rivers seems like he doesn't like any of the teams he's ever coached. But like with Erik Spoelstra, he does tend to veer in that direction. And
Well,
it is Pat Riley's and Andy Ellisberg's job to sort
right.
of reconstruct the roster. But
Right.
Spo, I do think like he had a sense, and I do think he believes this. This team was very close to winning the final or getting to the finals, winning the Eastern Conference Finals. They were one shot away, one Jimmy Butler front rim 3-pointer away from getting there. And so I do think that in this short of a time, it's still a quick turnaround. I know it feels like it's only been less than 48 hours. I still think that there's part of him that's like, man, we were this close and just not ready to even give up on this season necessarily, as weird as that sounds.
No, I agree 100%. Look, I'll be 100% honest with you, and maybe this is something that we'll kind of dig into later on at some point, or not at all. But I'm still too close to this thing, and I am not in that locker room, having traveled year in and year out. You know, after all the travel that this team does, all the issues with COVID testing, and look, they're lessened these health and safety protocols, but there's still an impact. Like the lives of NBA players, as much as we'd like to say that they're all millionaires and you can just kind of write it off, etc., it's an arduous thing. I don't think a lot of people would love the instability of traveling from place to place and having to, gear up and go through all this pressure. Having said that, yes, they're all compensated quite heavily. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's any easier, but still, all the emotions, the actual wear and tear of a grueling 7-game series, and to fall just short, as you said, because of one missed shot, it's a difficult thing to kind of wrap your mind through. That's why I think some of those star players weren't there, because they're more heavily invested in it emotionally than some of your typical role players.
Or on vacation.
Or on vacation.
Needing to get away from it. And that's what's interesting about Pat Riley doing his press conference, not today, but next week, is that he's going to be a little bit more removed from it. It'll be interesting to see what Pat says next week about this roster. But I would not be shocked if he had a similar sentiment to what Spoelstra is saying. You and I can debate, and we could do it on Twitter and all this stuff about whether or not this team is good enough to win a championship. And certainly national media was not under the impression that this team was good enough to even beat Boston. Probably not even to get to the Eastern Conference Finals, right? Like this, we got into this postseason at the start of it. They had worse odds than the Brooklyn Nets to make it to the finals, okay? And the Brooklyn Nets barely got into the playoffs, and the Heat were the 1 seed. So we know what most people think of this roster. So for Erik Spoelstra and Pat Riley to believe that this is a championship roster puts them squarely in the minority of people. That does not mean that they are wrong or right. It just means that if they believe that this team can win a championship next year, that's not what most people believe. I do think that Spoelstra does believe it, but what he said earlier in that comment, if you look at the Heat's history and how Pat Riley makes these types of decisions, they tend to run it back when they're close to, achieving their goal, winning a championship. They tend to run it back. And I'm interested to know what Spoelstra is specifically referring to, because is he talking about the Big Three Heat who got close in 2011 and then ran it back despite a whole lot of people saying, hey, this Big Three experiment's not working, trade Chris Bosh, whatever it is? Is he referring to that? Is he referring to maybe 2005 when they got there, where they got close with Shaq, and then we could argue whether or not they ran it back or not. A lot of people are sort of referring to that season being like, hey, they got close with Shaq and D Wade, and then they made that huge trade to get Gary Payton, Antoine, all these guys, and then they went out and won a championship. Or does Spoelstra, in referring to that, also think like, well, no, actually the core was like Dwayne Wade and Shaq and some of these other guys, and we just sort of tinkered around the edges, and maybe that's more of what he's thinking. I don't know. It'll be interesting.
Well, let's debate that in the next segment, because I think that's the conversation a lot of Heat fans want to listen to. And there are other takeaways from the exit interviews that are worth getting into. But right now it's the offseason. we'll get into all these talking points because we'll still be a daily podcast. And so we'll still be able to break it down, whether it's today, tomorrow, or the following day. At some point, you will hear from us about Tyler Herro's claims that he deserves to be an NBA starter and much more. But before we do that, just want to talk to you about Built Bar. Look, a lot of people have been asking for them, and they've delivered. Built Bar granola bars are here. The Built granola bars come in 3 unbelievable flavors: chocolate peanut butter, chocolate coconut, and white chocolate berry. If you want to try all 3 flavors, you can get a mixed box at built.com right now. So many different flavors, from the bars that you've already known and loved to the puffs. Built granola bars are loaded with granola. Of course, it's a perfect combination of crunch and chewiness, but just like bars and puffs, these babies are packed with protein and covered in 100% real chocolate. They've got all the nutrients you're looking for without feeling like you're indulging in a heavy treat. You're easy to pack when you're on the go in between meetings, if you're looking for something to fuel you before a workout, or you can pack them in your kids' lunches as they go off into summer camp and other things now that school is almost near an end. So go to built.com right now. Try the new granola bars as well as other flavors, the other flavors that they've always had. Go to built.com right now. Use the promo code LOCK15. You get 15% off your order. If you use the promo code LOCK15, you get 15% off your order at built.com. Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Make sure to go check out Locked On NBA Big Board with host Rafael Barlow from NBA Draft Junkies and the author of the NBA Big Board newsletter. He's joined by Richard Stamen, Sam Ferris, and Lee Thulin, giving fans an in-depth look into the NBA draft, mock draft, player rankings, and of course, big boards. It's free and available wherever you get podcasts. Let's get into it, man, because I'm feeling like that's a topic everybody wants to hear about.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, as I said before, I'm not quite ready to move past this season, just like many Heat players in the front office surely are not. But yet everybody's looking ahead already to what comes next. And I think the biggest debate...
let's stay there, man. Like, you've mentioned this a couple of times. You're not ready to move on. Why aren't you? It's been 48 hours. Get over it. Like, what's going on?
Look, I mean, as I've said before, you walk a fine line between being biased and unbiased when it comes to this profession. I don't think there's any doubt about how I started off. My point, this career path that I've chosen, it was basically something I just started doing that grew out of my own natural fandom. So that's absolutely where I started off. Having studied journalism didn't mean I was a journalist at any point in time. I was working in PR. Slowly became more invested in doing this by writing and talking about the show, and of course this podcast. That's been given me a lot of opportunities and helped me to make a lot of connections and to be part of this basketball world that I love so much. But having said that, my start began as somebody who really enjoyed watching the big 3 teams play and wanting to talk about it so much because I was so emotionally invested in it. And so while some of that has died down to a huge degree, I think it always winds up manifesting at times, especially during the playoffs. Like I was mentioning to my wife how I have this feeling every once in a while that I remind myself, oh yeah, that's right, the Heat lost, and how much I wanted them to beat Boston, if for nothing else than to quiet all the Celtics fans in our mentions and them talking about Jason Tatum, Marcus Smart, Bob Cousy, and everybody else on the Celtics roster being better than Jimmy Butler at one point or another. That's not a knock on John Corrales. He earnestly believed that Jimmy might be the 3rd best player. He was wrong, but that doesn't mean that he doesn't, that he's a bad person or anything like that. It was just a mistake, and you make it because I think he's also at heart a fan. So having said that, like watching the game and rewatching parts of it and rewatching the Butler shot in particular, I've come around on that, by the way. He absolutely made the right choice. Absolutely made the right choice.
Yeah.
Like watching it over and over and over again. Like there's no guarantee he could have gotten past Horford. Jaylen Brown was already completely hedged off from Victor Oladipo. Oladipo planted himself at the 3-point line. I thought to myself immediately when it was happening that maybe he could have dished it off to Oladipo for an open shot.
No,
there's absolutely no guarantee for that.
The only person on planet Earth that wanted that to happen was Victor Oladipo. That's the only person that wanted that to happen.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm with you 100%. Watching that even again, because when we talked about it immediately after the game,
Yeah.
I told you there's no logical reason why Jimmy Butler should have taken that shot other than Jimmy Butler thought he could make the shot.
Right.
And I'm with you. Like, you know what? No guarantee that, first of all, Al Horford was fantastic that whole series defensively. Yeah, Jimmy Butler had the angle on him. Al Horford was backpedaling, but who's to say Horford couldn't recover and block a shot at the rim? Because a lot of people are saying, like, well, you're Jimmy Butler, make the shot and get to the foul
After
line.
48 minutes of
First
play.
of all, the refs are not calling a foul in that situation. They're not doing it, okay? Like, Al Horford would have had to pick Jimmy Butler up and throw him through the roof to get a foul call on that. Like, there was just no way that was happening. And then, like you said, Jaylen Brown was already hedging down, and Jaylen Brown is a heck of an athlete. Like, who knows? Maybe he makes the play of the series at the rim, right?
Yeah.
And so Jimmy Butler had one chance to get a clean open three, which, by the way, the Heat also were not getting a whole lot of during the series, and a chance to just kill him. A chance to go for the kill. And then in exit interviews today, I asked Udonis Haslem about that shot, and he said that. He's like, we had a chance to win the game, to go for the kill. And that's what great players do. And that's what Jimmy Butler did. And I expect him to always take that shot, and I expect him to always make that shot. And I know that if it ever happened again, he would take that shot again, and I would be right behind him. And so, and I'm paraphrasing, but that's basically what he said. And so I've basically come around on that too. If you take that three and you make it, if you're Jimmy Butler, not only are you immortal, but you've also basically given the Heat, with 15 seconds left in that game, an astronomical chance of winning that game, as opposed to going for two, maybe turning it into a tie game, a foul game, maybe going to overtime, and then who knows what happens. You've already played 48 minutes if you're Jimmy Butler. Can you really even do overtime at that point? Do you have the legs for it? You barely had the legs to make that three. He didn't make the three. It front rimmed for a reason, but I'm 100% behind him taking that shot. You take that shot.
Absolutely. So to kind of put a pin on this whole conversation, then, like the fact that it fell down to just that one shot, the emotions of the comeback and everything else that entails, and the fact that there will be lingering questions about this team. And look, we've talked about this before on this podcast. I think it's a widely held view amongst people who follow this team or are fans of this team. They were not being talked about. They were not being considered. Nobody gave them the kind of credit that they've deserved all season long for either being the one seed, for fighting through adversity with injury, for dispatching the Atlanta Hawks easily, for getting past more talented players in Joel Embiid and James Harden, for putting up and dealing with this elite level Celtics defense and everything else. And yes, I'm using air quotes as I'm doing this for our YouTube watchers, because I think a lot of that is so overblown and, again, completely dismissive of what this team is going to be and was for all season long. And yet, they were right there. They were right there. They could have, if they hit this shot, as you said, they advanced to the NBA Finals, and then that puts an end to those stupid, pointless, and groundless conversations. And yet, that's where we are. He didn't make the shot. They lost. And so there's these feelings that Miami should have beaten this Celtics team. I don't care for any Celtics fans in our mentions talking about how much more talented they are or how they dealt with injury, etc. Miami was dealing with injury. They fought through it. For all the people that criticized me for saying, or for us for saying, that Marcus Smart's injury wasn't as severe as he made it look when he ran off to the arena, hallways, etc. The truth is that he did play for 4 more games after that.
Yeah.
For everybody dismissing Jimmy Butler for saying, oh, he didn't play well in those 2 games in between. Yeah, because he was hobbling on one knee. That's usually what happens. And yes, I understand Robert Williams was also dealing with a knee issue. But guess what? He also only played 17 minutes in that game 7 for a reason. So there's a lot there. I think Miami should have advanced, and I'm disappointed that they didn't. I can't help that.
But it sounds like you then agree with Spoelstra that this team is good enough to win to get to the finals, perhaps win a championship, and that they should just bring it back. My only thing is, the question I really have is, because I'm agree with you. I think this team was good enough to get to the finals, and I think this team was good enough to win the championship. I think they're in that tier. There was no clear favorite all season long. And there's no reason why the Heat should not be considered among the group of potential finals winners, okay? So I'm with you on that. But I don't know if that's going to be the case next year. I'm not saying it won't be, but I just don't know what the window is for this team. Kyle Lowry was completely broken down by the end of the game, or by the end of this series. It got to the point where Kyle Lowry, who had been known as this great point of attack defender and was brought in for that reason, in addition to some of the point guard stuff that he does, just was getting blown by because he's dealing with a bad hamstring for the entire playoffs. He's getting blown by name a Celtic. All of them are just going right around him. And he decided that his best version of defense was basically to just run into people and take charges, to just basically injure his body even more was his best option to play defense. Like, that's where we were at. So I don't know at what, and PJ Tucker, not even in at the end of the game because he just didn't have anything left to give. And I just wonder, Jimmy Butler's this dude. We know this. Like, I'm tired of, I'm over questioning Jimmy Butler. I'm just not going to do it. I'm just not going to do it. If he can, maybe he can do this again next year. I don't know. I'm going to just say, yeah, he probably can, because we've seen this now twice where he's just been able to lead a team to the finals or close to it. Give his team a chance. But I don't know what left Lowry has. I don't know what else PJ Tucker can give. And I don't know if the core is, like, based on what we saw from Tyler Herro in the playoffs and some of the 3-point shooters, that role players that just completely fell off. Like, I don't know what the window for this team is. I don't know if this was the last best chance. And so when Spo says we were knocking on the door of the finals, I'd like to bring this core back, and if you look historically at what we've done, this is what we do. I just find that interesting because it sounds like Spo thinks that the window is still open. And I don't know if that's true or not. I'm not, all I'm doing is asking the question, right? I don't think it's easy. I don't think we could just say, hey, they were this close now, so therefore they'll be closer like that. They'll have a chance next season. The NBA doesn't work that way.
Well, I think there's two questions. That one, whether or not the window is still open next season, and two, whether or not they have any choice. Like, I think a lot of people are assuming that wide-swept changes can be made, and I think that's something we're talking about in the next segment. But before we do that, a reminder that our partners at BetOnline continue to be the #1 source for all your betting needs and sports info. You can find all the latest odds, news, and sports developments, including this year's unfortunate basketball playoffs, Major League Baseball scores, fights, and even next season's NFL futures. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sporting wagering information, from live betting to the playoffs, esports, and more. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts. Just a reminder, you can always reach us via email at lockdownheat@gmail.com or via Twitter using the hashtag AskLFHeat. Be sure to please subscribe to the show and leave a review. As I've said before, we're going to be covering this entire offseason. We'll look at it from every angle, free agency, potential trades, etc. That brings us back to our
draft.
topic, the draft. I didn't even know we had a draft pick, but you know what? Everybody's looking past it. It doesn't matter because everybody sees the 27th draft pick and all of a sudden, like, oh, that's something else we can.
I'm going to make you care about the draft. That's my goal this summer. I'm going to make you care about it.
It's going to be tough, especially when everybody's trading that and X player along for said superstar. So take X scrub on Miami Heat's roster. Sorry, and it's not to say that there's any scrub. That's the way I'm kind of paraphrasing this. X role player. Let's put it this way: X role player plus draft pick equals Y superstar. That's the algebraic equation.
Wait, are you telling me that Duncan Robinson, Gabe Vincent, and the 27th pick won't net Donovan Mitchell? Is that what you're trying to tell me? There's a lot of people on Twitter saying that he can make that trade. So I don't know. You might want to check your sources on that. But yeah, that's the conversation, right? And that's when we talk about Spo being okay to bring the core back. The other question is, do they need to go for another big swing here? Do they need to go get Jimmy Butler a second scorer if it's not going to be Bam Adebayo every game? If it's not going to be able to be Tyler Herro based on what we saw in these playoffs, right? I'm not saying that that's the case, but that tends, like, if you are if you believe that this team needs to go make that big swing now, it means that that's what you think of those two players. And I don't know if you're right or wrong. It's just, that's what it is. And that that player is that other star is out there and gettable for Miami also. So I don't know. I want to dig into the Spo thing too, because a lot of people are comparing the situation now to what that 2005 team with Shaq and Dwayne Wade was doing, and kind of making that overhaul for, Antoine Walker and Gary Payton and all those guys. I don't think that that's the right comparison. I actually think that the Heat already did that. I think that was adding Kyle Lowry and PJ Tucker, and we've heard Pat Riley talk about in getting Lowry and Tucker, he literally made that comparison to the Gary Payton trade and all that stuff, saying, like, back then I needed guys with swords and shields, and he went and got those guys with swords and shields and Kyle Lowry and PJ Tucker. So if you're out here saying, hey, last time the Heat were this close, they went here and overhauled the rest of the roster around their two stars, that's what the Heat are going to do again. I got news for you. They already did that. Like, that's what they've just viewed this season as. This was the season of, like, they don't really care about last year when they got swept by the Bucks. They're looking at that Lakers bubble year and saying, hey, we need to supplement that core with Kyle Lowry and PJ Tucker. They went and did that, and they still fell short.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Because you look at the big three. The big three wasn't a fair comparison. Like, it never will be. They were perpetually close just because of the nature of that roster. And if you could step back and say, well, maybe they were willing to blow it up by trading Chris Bosh for Dwight Howard, another complimentary center, somebody, that fits that mode a little bit differently. But I don't know how realistic that was. I don't know that you could form that big three and build the hype up. And yes, we assume that they would probably be very close. They're probably one Ray Allen shot away from not having or having done that or not having done that. I understand why the 2004-2005 comparison is being made, but you're right. It doesn't make any sense. You went and already made those changes on the fringes because this team's core, and this team's core is probably going to be here next year too, includes Jimmy Butler, Bam Adebayo, and Tyler Herro. That's the core. You've got two all-stars and an all-star on the cusp, the sixth man of the year in Herro. And that's probably going to be your core moving forward. And so you want to add pieces around that to be able to do everything else on the fringes. You need a point of attack defender. Well, you've got one of the best ones who also happens to be Jimmy Butler's best friend. You need somebody who's gritty, can stretch the floor a little bit and play center on occasion to complement Bam Adebayo, who's a great switchable big. Well, guess what? You've got one from PJ Tucker.
Well, can we stay on the Lowry thing? Because you didn't mention Lowry when you talked about the core, and I'm with you. He's not part of the core. Not right. No, not at his age and not with that contract. But that's, if you're going to make a big change to this roster, I think that's where you need to start looking, is that point guard spot, and specifically Kyle Lowry. I said this on the show, but I don't know how you step away from this season. And you could tell me about injuries in the playoffs and all these things, but I don't know how you could step away from this season and not be a little disappointed, at least with Kyle Lowry and what he did. I'm not saying that he was bad. I don't think he was bad. And I think people are making too much of the playoff stuff. Like, he was clearly hurt. The hamstring thing was a real big deal. But even during the regular season, he wasn't awesome defensively the way that we've been used to seeing Kyle Lowry be defensively. He was getting blown by in the playoffs quite a bit at the point of attack. So I don't know that he's bringing you that point of attack defense that you hoped you were getting. I think there's like basketball IQ and savvy stuff that makes him a helpful part of this team. But if you're trying to upgrade this roster, I think you need to start there. The problem is Kyle Lowry making $30+ million at his age with 2 more years left on this deal. Who's taking that? Because last year who were the teams that were also trying to get him? It was Dallas and Philadelphia, and in addition to Miami. Philly's got James Harden. They're not adding Kyle Lowry. Dallas seems really, their priority seems to be retaining Jalen Brunson, not adding Kyle Lowry. Maybe if Jalen Brunson ends up on the Knicks or something, that they circle back to the Kyle Lowry thing, but I don't know that they're going to be wanting to do that at this point, not with what we just saw from Kyle Lowry this season. So you might be stuck with Lowry. I don't think, like, if you're trying to upgrade that spot, that's the first place you look, but you might have to move off that spot pretty quickly based on what's out there.
Also, I'll say this as far as Lowry is concerned. Like, I think we're being very harsh on him, considering, one, the injury, and two, the kind of emotionally trying season he's had. Like, everybody has just been very dismissive. It hasn't been reported, and I'm not going to do it now. But everybody who covers this team is more or less aware of what's gone on with Kyle Lowry behind the scenes. And having said that, he's been going through a great deal of personal trauma. Mm-hmm. These personal issues are a nice way of kind of encapsulating that, an umbrella type term that is used on these injury reports. But the reality is it's much more deeper than just that. You can't just say personal issue and just kind of have it, explain the situation fully. And having said that, it's been a difficult season for Kyle. He came in here with the best of intentions to play alongside one of his great friends, to be part of a championship, winning team, a team that has won titles and can continue to do so in the future. And as he said in his post-game presser, it was a failure of a season because they didn't win a championship this year. So nobody is more disappointed in Kyle Lowry and Kyle Lowry's season than Kyle Lowry. And I think we all have to take that into consideration. And to Erik Spoelstra's point during this post-game presser, he believes Lowry's going to be able to come back and return in the best shape of his career. That's not just cliche. That is him committing.
It's Spoelstra telling him that he has to. That's what that is, right? I don't
think that Spo would do that for a veteran.
I mean, maybe you're right. Maybe that's a little.
This isn't Riley telling
hyperbole.
you you've got the guts to stay. This is not, or in this case, you've got to lose the guts, right?
He is laying out. He is, whether intentional or not, he laid out his expectations of Kyle Lowry. I think we could say that, and I do think that Kyle Lowry needs to come back and play in training camp in the best shape of his career. I think that's what he needs. And I think that's what the Heat need from him. Lowry needs to have a better year next year than he had this season. And we could discuss the reasons, the personal issues, the hamstring injury, all of it. However you get there, next year needs to be a better season for Kyle Lowry than it was this year. And that's point blank. Like, if the Heat are going to win a championship, they need a better version of Kyle Lowry. So that was another takeaway of mine from these exit interviews, was that Spo expects Lowry to be in the best shape of his career come training camp of next year. And so maybe there's a lot of things that go into that, but hopefully that's the case for the Heat. Anything else?
Can I read the quote? I just want to read the quote from Erik Spoelstra about Lowry, because I have it here. You have to take into account everything: the missed games, the injuries, ramp up in the middle of the series, coming back from a hamstring injury. These are not excuses. It's just reality. Kyle was in an incredible groove about 6 weeks before the playoffs. If we had started the playoffs now, it would have been a perfect time for him. Kyle will come back next training camp in the best shape of his career. That's important as you get further into your career and into your 30s. That is your ultimate opponent, Father Time, and Kyle understands that. He trains hard, works at it behind the scenes, end quote. So
that is your ultimate opponent, Father Time. Great. Another great Spoism dropped right there.
Yeah. It's true. It's without a doubt. And I think Kyle is aware of that. I think we'll see a bounce back to some degree. I think he understands that things do have to change, that he has to tweak the things that he's done in the past. Other than that, no real takeaways for me.
Skinny Lowry. I know that's sort of the joke there. He could definitely make a return. I think when we talk about the hamstring issue in the playoffs, part of it is that he could have been in better shape. Another thing that Spoelstra said, he said basically 6 weeks before the playoffs was when he thought Kyle Lowry was in his best shape. And it would have been great for the Heat to just start the playoffs right there, or it would have been great for Kyle Lowry to just start the playoffs right there. 6 weeks before the playoffs is way before that hamstring injury. So that means like that. I don't know. Like I think that there needs to be a commitment on Lowry's end to get to that type of form way earlier in the season so that he can limit the wear and tear, so that he's not carrying so much weight. Like I'm not trying to body shame anybody here, but like he was bigger. He was not in shape the way that we have even seen Kyle Lowry to be in shape at other points in his career. So something needs to, like, Lowry does need to come back better. And a lot of that is just going to be in being in shape and the offseason conditioning and the Heat conditioning program and all that stuff. You want to do a quick notebook dump on some of the other takeaways?
Yeah, let's get into it.
Tyler Herro basically saying point blank that he wants to start. This is going to be a headline, but I don't know that this is new information for anybody, but it is worth having a conversation about now that the season is over. Tyler Herro saying that he wants to be a starter and that he's now in his 4th year and feels that he is deserved to be a starter. He's earned the right to be a starter. The obvious place for him to start is at shooting guard because he's not yet at point guard level. So do we think that Tyler Herro has earned the right to be a starter based on what wasn't a great playoffs for him?
No, quite frankly, I don't. I think that's kind of not brash necessarily, because you need that confidence in order to thrive in the NBA. I just don't think he's done enough either. I don't think he's proven that he can supplant anybody in that starting lineup. Maybe you could have had that conversation when Duncan was going through his struggles. But other than that, I think he provides a much needed boost to that bench. And I think that's his role. And I think that's where he's best at. And unless he comes back next training camp, that's the whole thing. It's like, I think Spo is far removed enough as a head coach to evaluate this roster and say, you know what? Our best chance of winning is Tyler as a starter. He's not doing this. He loves Duncan Robinson. He worked with Duncan Robinson to get him to the point. He worked with Duncan to get him a $90 million contract. And yet he said, you know what, Duncan, you're not cutting it. I got to put you on the bench, my man. And that's all there is to it. So he's not above hurting anybody's feelings because he wants to win. And that's the commitment from this team. Having said that, I don't think he thinks Tyler is the best option to start. And Tyler needs to prove it.
Yeah, that's going to be a big part of what Tyler has to do this offseason. He said that one of his priorities was to add strength this
Yep.
summer.
Another
And
15 pounds.
Another 15 pounds. And I thought it was, like, he said basically all this talk about me adding those 15 pounds, like as the season went on, he started losing that body weight and losing that body muscle. And I wonder if that's a little bit of what we saw in the playoffs. He also mentioned that the groin strain, as we've basically reported on this show, has been bothering him for a couple weeks before he ultimately had to be sidelined by it. He explained that it was bothering him, and then something popped or something, like something got really bothered, and then he couldn't play anymore. And that's what we saw happen there. But he wasn't playing great even before the groin strain in the playoffs. And so I wonder if he basically said he needs to add muscle that he can maintain. So I don't know if it's that dude just like, hey, you know what, man? Just go to McDonald's and eat a Big Mac every night. Like, I don't know what it is to keep the body weight on or whatever it is, but he needs to figure something out. And that's obviously one of his goals this summer and going into next season.
It's not like Jimmy Butler loses a significant amount of muscle mass throughout the course of the season. And that guy works just as hard as everybody.
Yeah.
I think he has to find a way to balance workouts with his NBA.
He's also just 22. Like he's not like in his physical prime, and I think that's a big part of it too. And Spo basically said that, he said, what you need from a player and what that player is ready to provide at that stage in his career can sometimes be different things. And he was referring to Tyler Herro in the playoffs.
Yeah.
And I thought that was pretty enlightening, and I thought that was actually pretty honest by Erik Spoelstra. So Tyler Herro, if he wants to be a starter next year, probably needs to add weight, get better defensively to the point where he's at the same level, if not better than Max Strus is. But I don't think that Max Strus is even considered the incumbent starter. I don't think that it's his job to lose. I'm pretty sure that spot in the lineup going into next season is going to be an open one in training camp. That would be my prediction.
Especially if they re-sign Victor Oladipo, who was not available for exit interviews. Caleb Martin, however, was available, and he did speak highly of this organization when asked about his future. He said he loved it here. He has a great fit here. He wants to continue being a part of this roster moving forward. I think there is a place for him, even though his minutes were cut. A lot of that had to do with injury. A lot of that had to do with just a tightened rotation as the playoffs go. He's going to have a role available to him next season if he does choose to re-sign here. So we'll see how that plays out. Udonis Haslem spoke at great length about this roster, about his future with the team. He says he needs the time to evaluate whether or not he comes back as a player. Doesn't want to be a coach. That's never going to be for him. Did say he didn't want to be part of the ownership group within 2 years. So I think his window is still to come back next season. If I had to put money on it right now, I'd say Udonis returns as a player, although he said he had to speak to his family about it. But other than that, were there any other takeaways?
Yeah, I think Haslem gets one more year. Another year. The other thing too, it's really hard to pass up like $2 million.
Yeah.
So
I've never been offered it, but I'd take it. I'm pretty sure.
That's kind of the unspoken part. He said I'll get together with Pat, and look, he's said this before. As long as they'll have me back, I'll be back. So we'll see if the Heat are comfortable giving him that money. There are luxury tax concerns that the Heat have to consider, but it's not like Haslem's out here making $10 million. He's making the veteran minimum, and even if you were to sign a younger player and a less experienced player to the minimum, it's not going to be a lot less than what you're giving Haslem. So I'm not sure that the luxury tax is an issue when it comes to Udonis Haslem. But I love his quote about, hey, if I get into that chair, meaning like an ownership level chair, we're going to have a conversation. I'm going to have some conversations with Dwayne Wade. And a lot of people are taking that into like, oh, he's going to bring D Wade on board. My read on it was more like if D Wade's going to be the Jazz owner and I'm going to be the Heat owner, basically he's going to be talking trash with D Wade. But how did you take that? Do you think that was almost like an early recruiting pitch to bring Dwayne Wade back into the fold in Miami?
No, I don't. I think he's been pretty clear about it. Like he's gone through this road before in 2016 when he saw Dwayne leave. And you know what? They said, at some point we want to come back and be owners together. I think if the door was open for Dwayne to become an owner, he would have walked through it in the first place. As far as being an owner in Miami, the reality was that door wasn't open. And so that's why he's in Utah right now. As much as he aligned with that front office and everything else like that, I don't think the reality is that there was an opportunity for him in Miami. Having said that, if UD becomes part of the ownership group, who knows what happens? I don't know. I'm sure he could always find a way to lure Dwayne back if that's really what he wanted to. But that's not how I interpret it at all.
Yeah, we'll see. I'm not even shutting the door on Dwayne Wade coming back. Like, Joe Lacob is the owner of the Warriors. He was a part owner of Boston of the Boston Celtics before he got like a larger stake in the Warriors. Like these owners don't just own one team and then stay there. Like a lot of these minority owners, and that's basically what Dwayne Wade is with Utah right now. Like Ryan Smith is the main owner of the Jazz. Dwayne Wade's just got a stake in it. Like they get those stakes in order to get larger ownership shares in the future. You basically prove yourself to the NBA. Hey, I am worthy of ownership stake in an NBA franchise, because the NBA also has to approve all owners, right? And so you prove yourself to the NBA. And basically, if you're any former player other than Michael Jordan and probably LeBron James when he decides to own an NBA team, like every player is going to have to go through those steps of let me take a very small minorship stake in a deal and then sort of work my way up from there. And that could be what Dwayne Wade does. And that could even be what Udonis Haslem was referring to, but we'll see. I would love for Dwayne Wade and Udonis Haslem to own the Heat together, but who knows? Whatever. Those were all my takeaways from the exit interviews. Strus said he was very unhappy with the reversal of the 3-pointer in Game 7. Not a shock there, but clearly was very, very bothered by it still.
He thought it was a momentum changer, and I don't know if I saw it that way as it played out.
Yeah, you can't just people are doing this now where they're just like adding that 3 and like, well, if they didn't take Strus's 3 away, Jimmy Butler wouldn't have had to make that 3 that he would have been winning at that point. That's not how sports work, and they've never worked that way, and they never will work that way.
They shouldn't have missed the other 20
being upset about it. Right. I understand if you're Strus being upset about it.
Right. Having made it. So yeah, that's it. So we'll continue to talk about some of these bigger picture questions about rebuilding the team, how you retool. We'll look again to get specific free agents, possibilities, and trades and things of that sort, as well as the upcoming NBA draft. So
we're going to answer the Donovan Mitchell question later in the week. Stay tuned for that.
Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Now make your second listen Locked On NBA. For the first jump ball of the play-in tournament to the last possession of the NBA Finals, Locked On experts take you deep inside the playoffs with insight and analysis affecting all 30 teams. This is David Ramil signing off for now. Thanks so much for joining me, Wes.
Wrap it up, B.